It wasn't an accident, Cassandra. We weren't here by mistake. The jets, they were sent to stop you. As the deafening roar of the planes echoed in her ears, Cassandra's mind raced, heart pounding. What did they want from her? Why had they targeted her after all these years? The world she'd fought so hard to leave behind was crashing back in, and she was about to find out why. The coffee pot let out a low hiss as the steam rose from the spout, filling the small kitchen with the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Cassandra's hand trembled slightly as she poured the dark liquid into her favorite mug, a simple ceramic cup with a chipped edge. She stared at the rising steam, her thoughts drifting for a moment, lost in the quiet of the early morning. Outside the window, the field stretched endlessly, a patchwork of greens and golds, the morning light brushing over them like a soft touch. The sun was climbing over the horizon, casting long shadows on the ground. Birds flitted across the sky, calling to each other in the crisp morning air. Everything felt calm, almost too calm. She placed the mug down on the counter, and her eyes fell on the small photograph beside the sink. It was a picture of her, younger, standing in front of a sleek fighter jet, her face full of confidence and determination. The photo was faded now, the edges curling with age. She hadn't looked like that for years. That woman, that fighter pilot, felt like someone else, someone she had buried deep inside. Cassandra picked up the mug again, her fingers gripping it a little tighter. The warmth from the coffee seeped into her palm, but it didn't settle the tightness in her chest. She had left that life behind, left the danger, the constant uncertainty. It was just easier this way. Green Valley, with its quiet streets and friendly neighbors, was the perfect place to start over. No one here knew about the long hours spent in fighter jets, the adrenaline of sky-high maneuvers, or the terror of losing control. They didn't know the real reason she had left the military, and she intended to keep it that way. The sound of a car door slamming outside jolted her from her thoughts. She moved to the window, her fingers brushing the glass, and peered outside. A neighbor was getting into his truck, waving as he passed by. She waved back, a polite smile on her lips. But the smile quickly faded as she caught sight of the distant sky. A shadow passed over the fields, cutting through the light, darkening everything in its path. Cassandra's heart skipped a beat. She had been hearing the rumors for weeks now, the talk of military jets in the area. But she hadn't expected them to be so close. She hadn't expected them to come back here. She grabbed her bag, her movements swift now, the peace of the morning slipping away like sand through her fingers. As she stepped outside, the quiet of the valley seemed to swallow her whole, the sound of her footsteps muffled by the stillness. She breathed in deeply, trying to steady herself, but the knot in her stomach tightened, and the soft hum of distant engines reached her ears. She squinted toward the sky, where two dark shapes were cutting through the clouds, low, fast, unmistakably military. Her pulse quickened as they grew larger, the sound of their engines growing louder, shaking the ground beneath her feet. She froze for a moment, her heart racing, as memories of her past surged to the surface. The rush of the sky, the power of the jet beneath her. She had left that all behind. She had chosen this quiet life, this ordinary life, and yet here it was, invading her again. The jets veered closer, their growls deafening now, and a chill ran down Cassandra's spine. They weren't just flying over the town. They were coming straight for her. No, not just her. The town. The place she had worked so hard to build a life in, to leave the past behind. Panic began to rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. No time to panic. She had to move. She grabbed the keys to her car from the porch table and rushed to the driver's side. Her hand shook as she started the engine, the roar of the car's engine drowned out by the deafening sound of the jets. Her eyes scanned the sky again. The planes were so close now, barely a mile away, and they were coming in fast. Too fast. Cassandra's mind raced, her military training kicking in despite the years of quiet teaching. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a training exercise. This was something else. The jets weren't just passing by. They were circling, their movements precise, deliberate. Cassandra's car sped down the road, her eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. The jets were right above her now, their shadows falling across her car like a blanket of darkness. She could feel the tremor in the air as they passed overhead, almost as if they were chasing her. But why? The sudden sound of a loud crack from above, followed by a sharp, high-pitched whine, made her heart skip. They were coming back for another pass. And this time, they weren't just flying over. The sky, once peaceful, was now filled with chaos. The jets came down lower, their engines roaring in a terrifying display of power. Cassandra's grip tightened on the wheel, her breath quickening, but her mind remained clear. She couldn't afford to panic. Not now. Not when everything she had worked for was on the line. Her car skidded to a halt. The jets loomed directly above her now, so close she could feel the heat from their engines. The world seemed to stop, and as she stared up at them, Cassandra realized that this wasn't just some random display. Something had brought them here, and whatever it was about to change everything. Today was not like any other. The sound of the engines grew louder, deafening in its intensity, and the ground seemed to vibrate beneath Cassandra's feet as she slammed the car into reverse. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could feel the cold sweat forming at the back of her neck, the panic rising in her chest. She had to move. The F-16s weren't just flying overhead. They were coming for her. Cassandra's breath quickened as she glanced in the rearview mirror. One of the jets was circling back, almost like it was following her, tracking her every move. The trees lining the road whipped past in a blur, the engine of her car roaring as she sped toward the turnoff back to her house. But it didn't matter. The planes were faster, their sleek shapes cutting through the sky with terrifying precision. She could see them now, two dark shadows in the sky, impossibly close. The sun, barely rising, cast them in sharp relief, gleaming metal against the fading orange light of the morning. It was a sound that filled every inch of the town, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated in her bones, the engines of the jets like a constant, gnawing presence. With her eyes darting between the road and the sky, Cassandra's heart thudded in her chest. This was no training run. They were targeting something, or someone, and for some reason, that someone was her. Cassandra pushed her foot harder onto the gas pedal, the wheels of the car skidding slightly on the gravel road. She didn't have much time. Her mind raced. Was this an attack? Was she being followed? What the hell was happening? The town was too quiet, too peaceful. There had never been anything like this here before. Not again, she muttered, almost to herself, though she knew it didn't make sense. She'd left it all behind, left the military life behind. Why was this happening now? The military wasn't supposed to find her. They couldn't. Not here, not in this quiet little town. The car jolted as she took a sharp turn, tires squealing against the pavement. She wasn't sure where she was headed anymore, only that she needed to get away, to find shelter, to hide. The jets, however, weren't giving her that luxury. The roar of their engines was so loud now it made her ears ring, and the air seemed to thrum with energy, as if the very sky above her was shaking in time with the jets. As she passed her own street, her heart sank. The planes were on her tail now, their speed a blur of metal and fire. The first jet passed over her car so low that she felt the rush of wind as it screamed overhead. Her stomach lurched as the ground seemed to quake beneath the power of the jet's engines. Her hands jerked the steering wheel, the car swerving to the side, almost crashing into the trees. "Get down," she yelled instinctively, though there was no one else around to hear. She could feel the pulse of adrenaline surging through her veins, and her mind raced with a mix of fear and reflex. Just as the jet pulled away, diving sharply to climb back into the sky, Cassandra's heart slammed in her chest. That was close, too close. It felt as though the jet had come down just for her. She could see it now, its metallic body catching the sun's early light, rising again like a predator in search of its prey. She had no idea why it was targeting her. The whole thing felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The second F-16 came into view, streaking past at an impossible speed, its engines roaring so loudly that Cassandra had to press her hands against her ears to block out the deafening sound. The plane dove in a tight arc, moving directly for her position. She slammed her foot down on the brake pedal, her car screeching to a stop in the middle of the road. Her eyes flicked to the sky once more, and in that split second, the world seemed to stop. The jet was coming for her, its descent sudden and sharp. The sound of the engine screamed louder and louder as it locked onto her position. The ground vibrated beneath her, as though the earth itself was being pulled upward by the force of the jet's speed. A flash of heat blasted through the air as the jet streaked past, too close, almost like it was trying to force her off the road, the roar of its engines shaking her bones. She ducked instinctively, throwing herself down in the seat, her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't process what was happening. The jets passed overhead, so close she could almost feel the heat radiating from their engines. The noise, the sheer force of it, was overwhelming. Cassandra stayed low, her heart racing, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. It was like the world was spinning out of control. Why was she being targeted? Why now? The military had no reason to come after her. She had left all of that behind. She didn't know how much time had passed, but the sound of the jets began to fade into the distance. Slowly, she lifted her head, her hands still gripping the wheel, her body trembling. The world around her was eerily silent now. The planes were gone, but the fear, the terror remained. Her pulse throbbed in her ears as she sat there, eyes scanning the sky, waiting for the next move. But nothing came. Nothing except the rising tension in her chest. And then, in the distance, she saw something. Someone. A figure moving through the trees. She wasn't alone anymore. Someone else was out there. Someone who knew what was happening. And that person, whoever they were, might hold the answers to the nightmare unfolding around her. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the door handle, ready to jump out of the car and find cover in the woods. But just as she was about to make a move, something unexpected happened. One of the fighter jets broke off from the others, pulling up sharply into the sky. The other jet, the lead aircraft, stalled midair. Cassandra's breath caught in her throat as she watched, wide-eyed, unable to believe what she was seeing. The jet wavered in the air, its nose dipping, the pilot struggling to regain control. The roar of the engine cut out, replaced by the sickening sound of the jet spiraling downward. She could only watch in horror as the jet tumbled, spinning toward the mountainside. The world seemed to slow down for a moment. The trees below, the rocky cliffs, the jet, everything came together in a blur. Then, with a deafening boom, the jet crashed into the side of the mountain, sending a shockwave through the air that rattled her bones. Cassandra jumped back, her heart slamming into her ribs. The explosion was so loud, so violent, that she thought the entire valley was going to crumble beneath her. For a few seconds, everything went silent. The only sound was the ringing in her ears and the distant echo of the explosion. Smoke billowed up from the mountainside, dark and thick, climbing into the sky like a twisted pillar. Cassandra's hands were still shaking as she stared, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Then, out of the smoke, a figure emerged. Cassandra's breath hitched as she saw him, coming down slowly, drifting toward the ground, a parachute billowing above him. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the figure. The parachute opened fully, and the man glided effortlessly to the ground, landing with a soft thud about 100 feet away. She didn't need to look twice to know who it was. It was Matt Livingston, a face she hadn't seen in years but would never forget. He had been one of her fellow pilots when she was still in the military, a close friend and someone who had always been there for her in the chaos of the skies. Matt's face was hard to read as he landed, his expression unreadable beneath the layers of dirt and dust, that clung to him from the crash. He looked like he had just come from the middle of a storm, his jumpsuit torn in places, his parachute tangled around his legs. But despite the chaos, he moved with the same precision and calmness she remembered from their time in the air. There was no panic in his eyes, only determination. Cassandra's legs felt weak, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she could stand. Her breath was still shallow, her mind still racing. The jets. The crash. Matt. What was going on? Her feet moved before her brain could catch up, and she found herself walking toward him, the ground beneath her seeming to shift with every step. When Matt saw her approach, he stopped, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence between them was thick, as if the world had paused, holding its breath. "Cassandra," Matt finally spoke, his voice hoarse but steady. "I didn't expect you to be here. I didn't think you would be this close." Cassandra swallowed hard, her throat dry. "What's happening, Matt? Why were those jets? Why were they after me?" The question came out with more desperation than she meant, but it was all she could think about. Matt's gaze softened, but his jaw tightened as if he were struggling to hold something back. He took a deep breath and took a step toward her, then another. "I'll explain everything," he said, his eyes flickering to the wreckage behind him. "But we don't have much time. They'll be coming for us, and we need to move now." Cassandra's chest tightened as her pulse raced again. Whoever they were, it was clear they weren't done with her yet. And this time, there would be no running away. Cassandra's heart pounded in her chest, the words Matt had just spoken echoing in her mind. They were sent to stop you. She couldn't wrap her head around it. Stop me. It felt like the ground had dropped out from under her, and she was free-falling into a nightmare. The life she had fought so hard to leave behind. Her time in the military, the planes, the danger was pulling her back, dragging her into something she didn't understand. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. Why? Why her? She had built a peaceful life here in Green Valley. She had no intention of ever going back. But now, with Matt's words hanging between them, she was beginning to feel a horrible truth settle into her bones. There was no running from the past. Cassandra swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached out to Matt. "What do you mean they found out who I am?" Her voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking the words aloud might make them more real. "I've been out of that life for so long. I'm just a teacher now, a nobody." Matt shook his head slowly, his gaze flickering to the wreckage of the jet, and then back to her, his expression grim. "They don't see it like that. They don't care about your quiet life, Cassandra. You were one of the best. They never forgot you. And now, they need you again." His voice dropped to a near whisper, as if saying the words aloud made them more dangerous. "The government. They're planning something big, something dangerous. They need someone with your skills to carry out this mission." Cassandra felt the ground shift beneath her feet, her knees going weak. A mission? Her mind couldn't make sense of it. She had spent years trying to forget the fear, the adrenaline, the endless pressure. She had found comfort in teaching, in watching children grow and learn. That was her life now. That was who she was, or at least who she thought she was. "Matt," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm not that person anymore. I can't go back to that. I can't." She stopped, realizing how desperate she sounded. She wasn't just speaking to Matt now. She was pleading with herself, trying to convince herself that she wasn't trapped in some twisted dream where the past was coming back to haunt her. But before she could say anything more, a rustling sound broke through the tension. Cassandra froze. Her heart skipped a beat, and every muscle in her body tensed as she spun around, her eyes searching the woods around them. The footsteps were growing louder, and they were coming closer. Matt's hand shot out, grabbing her arm to pull her to the side, just as a figure emerged from the trees. It was Patricia, another face from Cassandra's past. The shock of seeing her was almost as much of a blow as the realization that this was bigger than she could have imagined. Patricia's face was hard, eyes narrowed, her expression tight with worry. "You're right, Matt," she said, her voice low and steady. "They didn't just target you, Cassandra. They want you for something much bigger." Cassandra felt a chill run through her. Her mind was already reeling, but now, hearing Patricia's words, everything seemed to fall into place, and none of it made any sense. Her chest tightened as she looked between Matt and Patricia, struggling to keep up. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Her voice broke slightly, the weight of her confusion and fear pressing on her. Patricia stepped forward, glancing over her shoulder nervously. "The government's been planning something for months. It's a mission, a covered operation. They've been assembling the best pilots, the best specialists, and they want you, Cassandra." Her eyes softened for a brief moment, then hardened again. "They know your skills, your expertise, and they've been watching you, tracking you. They've been waiting for the right moment to pull you back in." Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. Watching her, tracking her. The idea was maddening. She had left that world behind, settled into a life of normalcy. And now, somehow, they had found her. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why now? I don't even fly anymore. I don't want anything to do with that world." Patricia stepped closer, lowering her voice. "It's not about what you want anymore. This is bigger than all of us. They need you, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." The words hung in the air like a weight, suffocating her. A lump formed in Cassandra's throat as the reality of the situation settled in. The fear she had felt earlier was now mixing with a deep, unsettling sense of betrayal. She had spent years building a life, trying to forget the violence and chaos that had once been a constant companion. And now it was all coming back to her. She felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She wouldn't cry. Not now. Not in front of them. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, trying to gather the strength to face whatever was coming next. But deep down, she knew the truth. There was no running away from this. Whatever they wanted, whatever they were planning, it was happening. And she was right in the middle of it. Her hands balled into fists at her sides as she looked at Matt and Patricia, both of them waiting for her to say something. Anything. Her voice trembled as she spoke, barely above a whisper. "I don't have a choice, do I?" Matt's gaze softened as he shook his head, his voice quiet. "I'm afraid not." Cassandra closed her eyes for a moment, trying to swallow the bitter taste in her mouth. The quiet life she had wanted so badly was slipping away. And now she had to face a mission that might destroy everything she had ever known. The helicopter's blades chopped through the air as it flew deeper into the mountains, carrying Cassandra, Matt, and Patricia toward the hidden military base. It was a place that didn't exist on any map, a location known only to a handful of government officials who had chosen to remain in the shadows. The landscape below was a jagged, rocky mass, uninhabited and wild, as though it too had been carved from the earth to hide secrets. The weight of it all pressed down on Cassandra. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: her life was no longer her own. She sat silently, her hands clenched in her lap, her body rigid. The motion of the helicopter, the hum of its engines, felt distant, like a muted echo in her mind. She thought about Green Valley, the simplicity of the life she had built there, the quiet joy of teaching, the smiles of the children she had taught. It felt like another lifetime now, something that had been ripped away by the force of the past crashing back into her world. The helicopter touched down on a small, flat platform at the edge of the base, and the doors opened to reveal the cold, sterile surroundings of the military compound. Armed guards stood in formation, their eyes trained on the trio as they disembarked. Matt led the way, his presence commanding, but his expression remained hard to read. Patricia followed closely behind, her face betraying none of the emotion that Cassandra felt churning inside her. Cassandra was ushered into a large briefing room, its walls lined with screens displaying satellite images, maps, and encrypted data. The air smelled of coffee and metal, a mixture that felt suffocating. At the head of the room stood several high-ranking military officers, their faces serious, their eyes cold. They didn't seem interested in pleasantries. They had a mission, and they expected results. One of the officers, a tall man with a gruff demeanor, stepped forward. "Cassandra, we're glad you're here," he said, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. "We've been tracking an international threat, one that could destabilize entire regions. We need someone with your skill set to lead this operation." Cassandra's heart raced. She tried to steady herself, to focus on the present, but every part of her wanted to turn and walk away. She could feel the weight of their expectations pressing on her, suffocating her. "Work with us," the officer continued. "Help us neutralize this threat. Or refuse, and face the consequences. You don't have a choice." His words were final, as though the matter had already been decided. Cassandra's mind whirled. I don't have a choice. The idea of refusing was tempting. How badly she wanted to walk out of that room, to run back to her life in Green Valley, where things made sense. But the truth was, she couldn't ignore the pull of responsibility. The threat was real. The stakes were higher than anything she had ever faced before. She could refuse, hide, and pretend it wasn't happening. But people, innocent people, would pay the price. Her eyes flicked to Matt, and then to Patricia. They were both waiting for her to decide. They had come this far, and now it was up to her. But what did they expect from her? She was no longer just a teacher, no longer someone who could hide from the world. The past had caught up with her, and she had to face it head-on. Taking a deep breath, Cassandra stood tall, her body steadying, the weight of the decision settling into her chest. "I'll do it," she said, her voice low but firm. The words felt heavy on her tongue, but they were true. The mission needed her, and she wasn't going to run from it, but on one condition. The officers looked at each other, intrigued, their expressions unreadable. "What's that?" the same officer asked, his brow furrowed. "My town, Green Valley, it stays out of this. No one gets involved. My life there is mine, and I'm not bringing this fight to my doorstep. Not my students, not my neighbors. No one. If you want me, you'll have to keep them out of it." There was a pause, the officers exchanging looks, before the tall officer nodded slowly. "We can arrange that. But know this mission will require everything from you. If you choose this path, there's no going back." Cassandra's heart beat harder in her chest, but her decision was made. She wasn't going to back down now. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, despite the storm inside her. With a sharp nod, the officer turned toward a set of doors leading out of the room. "Your plane is waiting, Commander." Cassandra felt a chill run through her. Commander. It felt like a weight settling on her shoulders. She had been called many things in her life, but never that. She had lived in the shadows of that identity for so long, trying to bury it, and now it was forcing its way back to the surface. As they walked out of the briefing room, Cassandra couldn't help but glance back at the screens, at the maps that showed the magnitude of the operation. The mission would take her back into the skies, back into the danger she had tried so hard to leave behind. But now, there was no choice. She had made her bed. When they reached the hangar, a sleek fighter jet sat on the tarmac, ready to take off. The familiar hum of engines filled the air as the crew worked quickly to prepare the plane. Cassandra's mind flashed back to the first time she had climbed into the cockpit, the excitement, the fear, the sense of power. But this time, it was different. This wasn't a training mission. This was real. People's lives depended on her. She climbed into the cockpit, pulling on the helmet, the weight of the decision settling into her bones. As she powered up the engines, the jet's roar vibrated through her, the intensity of it rushing back, pushing her forward. She was no longer just a teacher, no longer just someone who had hoped to leave it all behind. She was back in the fight, and she was ready. But as the jet lifted off the ground, rising into the sky, a strange sense of unease tugged at her. She had made her choice, But what she didn't know was that the true enemy, one far closer than she could ever imagine, was already moving in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more amazing content, and share this with your friends. Your support means the world. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let's start a conversation.